Hi there, folks. Saber4 here. Back today with a look at defeating the new meta decks. I say the new meta decks because we've done a series of these throughout Jump to Lightspeed, and as the meta evolves, so should our series for defeating meta. This update, we're going to talk about things that are here kind of mid Jump to Lightspeed. We are a week out from the regional qualifier in Minnesota, and puts us a month and a half or so from the World Championships, though that will be behind the next set as well. In this video, we're going to talk specifically about Ray, Han2, and Qi'ra. So let's go ahead and dive in. What we're going to get a look at the current meta. I'm going to keep it pretty brief. I did not pull a whole lot of data for this one. I did look over some of the things that are there, but I'm not going to go too deep into them. We'll talk about the newcomers, and in each we'll get how they work, how they fold, and matchup tips. Before we get going, if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. Really helps out a ton with growth, and I would very much appreciate it. All right, let's go ahead and get started. The current meta. What we're seeing is a big rise in data vault. I pulled this data prior to this weekend's PQs, which saw several that are of that critical mass threshold, about 32 players or so, that we start to really add into the data pool. But prior to this weekend, post-ban, 30% of top eights are running data vault. The health pool is 1/3 larger, 8 hit points larger than ECL. Which was 17% of the meta, and is still the same 8 points larger than Tarkentown, which has fallen well behind to just 13.6%. 10% larger at 3 points than the common 30 health bases, which make up the remainder. Now notice, that's more than half of the time that you're going to be seeing one of these rare bases, either a Data Vault, ECL, Tarkentown. There's a small group of people that are running Colossus, but that's 4% or so. But it's much more likely that you're going to see this as added base health above what your opponent is playing if they are playing something besides Data Vault. The extra 10 cards, they slow down mill decks quite a bit. And so this has been sort of a built-in anti-control. Bossk Blue, one of the win cons for Bossk Blue was to mill people out, chip away a little bit with damage if they needed to, do some protection, do one-for-one removal, do a lot of things that really slowed the game down, and then mill a deck out and make it where card draw, rather than anything else, was providing a good portion of base damage. 10 extra cards, that's almost 2 full cycles of Vigilance. And so it's a lot harder for somebody playing a second win con of mill hard control to beat one of these decks. And so that has kind of fallen back a bit as well. Mid-range has always done well into aggression, and so that's where we are. We're 3 mid-range decks. Things that are declining. Quinlan Tarkentown, because it is a huge gap to try and make up, and Quinlan is relatively slow as far as his big plays can swing for 6, but most of his swing for an average a little under 3. And so that makes it a very slow and very difficult matchup into something that has 3 extra swings worth of health. And then Anakin Colossus, specifically Anakin Colossus, because he was one that really utilizes that base well. We are seeing some Piet that is running that base, but it is that smaller pool of card draw is impactful. The decks that are rising, Ray Data Vault, Han2 Data Vault, Qi'ra Data Vault. And those are the 3 that we're going to look at today. All right, let's go ahead and jump in with Ray, and we'll talk about how they work. We'll do this same cycle with each of these 3 leaders. Ray is an experience generator. She is going to use a lot of very small units that grow in value. Has a high volume of those units with Restore, and already is on a 33 health base. And so even where Ray is providing chip damage or is trading out units or doing things like that, quite often she's doing so in a way that also heals damage back from the base. And so it's not uncommon if you are attempting chip damage that you're going to have, that your victory clock is going to have to exceed 40 to 45 health. And that's a really hard thing to do. You know, I did a video previously where we talked about setting your clock, setting a victory clock, understanding how many actions it takes for you to win a game. And when we did that based off of a 25 health base, Sabine can take that out in 9 actions on average. When we're talking about a 45 health base, that's a lot closer to 15 actions. And when Ray is able, as a single attack from Ray is able to reset a full one of those, or a single attack from Luke is able to reset a full one of those, you can really stall out several of these aggressive decks. There's a lot of chaff units at the low end. I mean, a lot of chaff units at the low end. We'll see in the deck next that exactly what I'm talking about. But you also have some higher end stuff that you've got access to, because the blue-green combo here in Heroism gives you home 1. It gives you U-Wing reinforcement, which can bring in a lot of board presence. You also have Luke in this deck, who provides both some removal and the best unit blue has in the game as far as Heroism goes. So we're talking about some good stuff that we can get our way to, even if we don't start out with very major presence. Blue provides us access to quite a lot of Sentinel, and that Sentinel presence further delays attacks into the base. The last thing here is that our leader action with Rey is less consequential post-flip, because we are trying, she is at 6. We are trying in those early turns with Rey to spam out some of those small units. But in the later game with Rey, we are trying to play with our closers, and that would be Home 1 and Luke, which are greater than 3 attack and are not going to benefit from that leader action. So let's look at a Rey deck. This is the winner from the Dallas PQ. There was a very similar, if not identical, deck that won another 100-plus player PQ within that same couple of weeks. What we see here, and I'm going to move my mouse around on screen if you can see it, what we see here is things like a set of 1-drops. There's 7 of them, right? There's the Alliance Dispatcher, Clone Deserter, R2-D2, which provide filtering with R2, which provide a discount for play with a Dispatcher, and then provide Restore for the Clone Deserter. All 3 of these can benefit from Rey's ability. So Rey could come out on turn 1, drop one of these units, bring it up an experience token. And both the Clone Deserter and R2-D2 can be brought above that 3 threshold, and so make it very difficult for a lot of things to just clear that unit off of 1 attack. So it is incredibly difficult, if one of those is her first turn play, to be able to just remove it off the board. The next thing I want you to see here is how deep that goes. So you have up to here where we're talking about resupply, which we'll talk about in just a minute. All the units through Yoda are 3 cost or less, and most of them are capable of receiving an experience token. Now, only 1 Sentinel in this particular list, and that is Village Protectors, which is quite possibly the most annoying of them, as it can get that shield token on it. I'm not above entrenching my own Village Protectors if I am at the right spot in the game, though entrench is often used for dealing with space. Only a few things in this deck: the Blue Leader, the Fleet Lieutenant, the Luke Skywalker, and the Home 1 are things that Rey cannot provide experience tokens to. You do have a little bit of targeted removal here in Takedown and Fell the Dragon. You do have Traitorous in here to deal with maybe some space units or some things that get upgraded on your opponent's side that cost 3 or less. And you do have Tech in here. There is Ramp between Resupply and Spark of Hope. And then the sideboard allows for a little bit more of targeted removal, adding in another Takedown or Rival's Fall, and some card denial when we're talking about Regional Governor. So like I said, this won a couple of 100-plus person PQs. Let's talk about how it folds, what this deck does when it does things poorly. Number 1, things aren't allowed to grow. Of the 41 units that are here, 29 are 3 or less power. The ideal drop for Rey is to bring something above that 3 threshold immediately, and make it where your opponents can't trade into that unit without spending another card. And so if you are using unit-based removal, it makes it where it is very difficult to do that and get value on turn 2, which allows Ray to play another unit, give an experience token to something again, and make it where she's kind of on her ramp, right? When opponents skip early game damage, when they pour into those units, keep them removed, keep them small, and play the late game. Because if you're talking about this, yeah, Home 1 and Luke are very good cards. However, both of them are 6 and 7 attack. And we can get around Luke and we can get around Home 1 in several ways in other decks. Your chip damage into this deck is trivial because Clone Deserter, Yoda, Sundari Peacekeeper, Akbar, all of these, if they're able to swing at all, are going to remove that chip damage. So if Ray's opponents focus on removing units in the early game, especially early units that are going to extend the game by doing that restore, that can shrink that clock a little bit instead of having it run way out into the 40s or 50s. Ramp by resupply. Yes, this deck does want to ramp. It wants to get to Luke and Home 1 a little faster. It wants to get to a 6-cost deploy leader a little faster. It would rather ramp by Spark of Hope than by resupply, especially in turn 2, because with a turn 2 resupply, we do not develop our board. Turn 2 resupply means that you are spending all 3 of your dollars getting the next resource. Turn 2 Spark of Hope means that somebody had to crash into one of your units, or you could put down another 1-drop and Spark of Hope by having somebody remove a unit. It's the better card for them to use, especially in the early game. But if you can force them in, if they are forced into resupply, that's a little worse for them. And then finally, having an opponent that limits Ray's attacks. 3 damage that Ray does isn't nothing, but it has a delta of 6 because she does restore 3, and it can actually be a delta of 7 because she can give an experience token to something. And so that's a huge swing when we're starting to talk about a deck that really, Ray's first swing, this is a 36 health base. Ray's third swing, and we're talking about something that's at 42. And so that's a big, big number to try and get over. And so limiting Ray's attacks, limiting Luke's attacks, and getting rid of those things that do big restore is key to kind of folding this deck down. Let's talk about matchups. Aggression. On a 25 base, especially, your matchup is very unfavorable if you allow their units to grow. Use ECL early to remove one of those early plays. It is not to your advantage at all to hold ECL for down the road if it means that a unit is going to grow past a place where your unit can take it out. A lot of the stuff that is played in these aggression decks has 3 or 4 health. Some of it has 5 or higher, but a lot of it can get to a point where it just doesn't trade efficiently into some of the things that Ray puts on the field. And once she puts down a village protector and you've got to spend 2 attacks to get through it, you really, really are on the back foot. If possible, hold Poe for Ray's flip. He is a one-shot for her because Ray flips, and if Poe is there ready to attack, that's just 6. He takes it right out, and he can ping an experience off. He can do 2 extra damage to something else. Poe is very valuable for these. He is more valuable for these aggression decks, I think, than Wrecker. Wrecker can still come out in 2 for 1. He can still push damage. He can take out Luke. He can do a lot of things that are very good. Poe is better because Poe can still do those same targets. Poe can take out Ray and not take lethal damage back, forcing you to a 2 for 1. That's a great play. If you're playing Sabine, which a lot of people are who are playing aggression, the ping is almost never your friend, especially in the early game, and especially if it means losing initiative, because you want to be able to be on the front foot, take out those units if necessary, or push the damage in a place that they are having a harder time recovering from. Um, that ping damage, especially in the early game, like we said, is trivial. It is going to be erased by units that are able to attack into and clear your units if they are allowed to grow. If you're playing control and playing the control part of this game, consider where you are using your removal cards. If you are able to play some unit-based control into this, you're going to be a lot better off for it. Simply because if you are playing your unit, if you're playing your card-based removal and you're playing your 1-for-1, when the time comes, did you have 42 of them? Did you have a way to deal with? Did you have to spend all of your resources, all of your? And in this case, I'm not talking about your resources in the game. I'm talking about the resources in your deck. Did you spend all of those trying to deal with the chaff? And if you did, that means that Luke or Home 1 are going to stick, and you're going to have to now use one of your big units and hope that you can take it out and not get looped back, so that you get so that you drop that unit without a very clean trade. Traitorous can be a huge lift against this deck. Yes, they've got Traitorous back, but they don't have a whole lot of ways to remove any of your. They don't have a whole lot of ways to remove any of your upgrades. And so that said, popping Traitorous on something that they have taken the time, energy, and effort to grow can be very problematic for this. Pushing yourself to space where they don't have a lot of answers can be very problematic for this, because as we saw, there's not a whole lot of space presence. They had Blue Leader, they have Home 1, and those two are pretty far apart. Blue Leader is looking to ambush quite often, and in the middle of that, they can put out a Bright Hope, and that Bright Hope is big to get through. But if you are running a heavy enough space presence, especially if you are able to remove that threat, then that's a place where you can get a lot of value. Consider your damage-based removal and the math of things like Overwhelming Barrage. Is it going to benefit me to use my OB early in order to take out more units because my opponent has not yet had the time to put an experience token on something, versus attacking with a unit and potentially losing that opportunity to clear others? And so the timing and sequencing of your Overwhelming Barrage is very important, or your other unit base or your other damage based removal. Take advantage of board resets. Qi'ra loves Overwhelming Barrage, and that's the main control deck that you're going to see right now. Super Laser Blast is another big one. Do I push the Super Laser Blast right now in a place where they've spent resources? I would love to play Super Laser Blast when my opponent is at 7 resources available or less, because that means that this turn they are not going to be able to drop U-Wing Reinforcement and push something back out, which really floods the board again. Recognize which of your units can get multiple for ones as far as their trades, and are units that your opponent is going to have to remove, and take advantage of those situations. Finally, in the mirror matchup, notice that this deck did not have Vigilance. So, if you're looking at it and considering that Rey is big where you are, or you're going to go play this somewhere and you anticipate this to be a larger portion of the meta, make considerations for that. Do you want to put them in place of Regional Governor and make it where, game 2, hey, we're going to sideboard in, game 1's going to be a slugfest. Who knows what's going to happen with it? Game 2, we're going to sideboard back in and we're going to go Vigilance in place of Regional Governor and be able to mill things out. In all matchups, we should be aware that Tech is a KOS, especially in a later game play, because Tech means that their resource row is a second hand. And we're going to have to deal with him as quickly as possible, because a 3/6 Tech who is able to turn over resources and allow things like putting down Luke early in that resource row. I mean, we're not going to be able to hide from Tech being in that resource row. But getting rid of him means that they can't come back and play Luke from there, or come back and play Home 1 or something else like U-Wing from there. And so dealing with Tech as quickly as possible is going to be a big, big thing for this matchup, especially in the end game. Let's move on to Han. How does Han work? Han cheats resources at the cost of unit health, and that creates some rather unique sets of stats. And what I mean by unique sets of stats, I don't mean that they are singletons, that they're incredibly different, right? A cheated out Cassian is a 3/3, but that's going to outvalue a lot of things that have 2 health. That's going to make it where you don't have to play very many 2-drop cards in this deck. Make it where 3 attack is a much easier stat line to get, and we're going to see that when we look at this deck, that there is not a lot of low attack unit in here. This has a heavier top end, but does not have restore because it's in red-green instead of in blue. This is a deck that is, again, very unit heavy. It is unit-based control it is unit-based control in the matchups that it needs to be, because it can trade units very efficiently, because it is getting out the larger unit in most cases, and at the cost of reduced health. But that also means that you are quite often having to push damage into those units in order to mitigate their larger attack. Very similar to Rey, very unit dense, except there's very little restore, and there is some Sentinel presence in here, but it's very limited in amount of direct Sentinel. The long game, this can get to relatively quickly, and it can follow your ramp with things like Cham Syndulla, but it looks to get to Crate Dragon and Home 1 to close things out, and a 10-8 Crate Dragon is still a very, very big threat. You're still going to have to sink a lot of damage into it to get rid of it, or you're going to have to sink some damage into your own base to get rid of it by playing cards. General Recon is used to stabilize the mid game. The core idea of this deck is to create value mismatches. I'm going to trade a little bit of health for a little bit of cost, and because of that, and because there is no discount to events and upgrades, I'm probably going to play as few of them as possible. There's some that are beneficial enough that I can justify their cost, but very, very few. This list is Dameron's list, who won the PQ in Altamont Springs. There's been a couple that cropped up that have played a very similar list to this. He has a video or two that explain both this and some of his thoughts and play lines. So I would defer to that as far as somebody who has played a lot of this deck, but I can show you what a lot of this deck does. As we see, there's only a couple of 2-drops in this deck, and that is Battlefield Marine and Sabine Wren. Battlefield Marine, you can cheat out and be a 3/1. Sabine, you can cheat out, and she can attack as a 3, and she can be a 3/1, but there's nothing in here that has 2 health. And so everything in this list can come out for value, can come out under value without being just dead. Cassian is in here. Blue Leader is in here. Those are both good targets for turn 1 plays. Echo Base is a little bit less of a thing that we want, but good grief, if we play Red 5 on cost instead of for value in this deck, it can really, really do some damage, because everything that your opponents are having to sink damage into, Red 5 can just clean up. The on attack ability from it to pop 2 damage to something that you had to, your first turn play had to attack into Cassian. And if for some reason, let's say that you were playing with Rey and you had 4 health on that thing, And so you've got something left over. Well, down the line, red 5 would be able to pick that off just by attacking the base. Uh, Bright Hope is in here as a sentinel. You do have Echo Base Defender, which is in here as a sentinel. And so your sentinel presence is very useful because General Recon can absolutely stall the game if one of those is on the field, especially if he comes in off timely intervention. Because coming in off timely intervention allows him to come in, yes, as a 5/5, but allows him to both put an experience token on that or make himself the sentinel, and then by making himself the sentinel and then attacking, give himself an experience token. So would be able to come in and, if you're playing him for 7, you can bring him in as a 6/8 through timely intervention. Note that you cannot do that with Han's ability because it takes an action on both sides. And so if they come in with General Recon, they can't come in and ambush for cheaper. A couple of big things in this, a 6/4 Poe at 4 is incredibly dangerous. Getting 15 on a base is pretty easy, and bringing in a guerrilla attack pod that has flipped its stats because of grit and comes in ready is incredible, because we're now talking about something that's a 6/4 and ready, and that can push a lot of damage in a hurry. Your Rebellious Hammerhead can often do 2 or 3 damage when it comes in and play in as a 5/5, which is a perfectly fine stat line for 5 cost. Early decks, we were very, very willing to do that with Gideon Hask, for example, as a 5/5. And so getting a 5/5, 4/5 that does damage when it comes in, Rebellious Hammerhead's great here. Wrecker, same thought process. Mace Windu, you're getting a 5/5 ambush for 6 that stands back up when he clears a unit. That's an incredibly powerful chain. And then we get out to Home 1 and to Crate Dragon, and Home 1 brought in 4/7 that then grabs another piece of value is an incredibly powerful combination. But if you wait until later in the game, and let's say that you get your way up to 11 resources, you bring in Home 1 for 7, and it discounts 3, you can... 12 resources. You can make it where Guerrilla Attack Pod or Poe Dameron come in from discard off of Home 1. And both of those are high value. You can make it where a Delphi Patrol Squad comes in off of that. Another very high value. Earlier than that, you could pull Heavy in off of it, and you could pull it in for the same as you would playing the normal 8, just because you're discounting Home 1 in, and then you are rebuying that dollar by paying an extra 1 for Heavy. Or Poe Dameron, which would be just absurd, because then you create several units at once, and you can come back and pilot Home 1 if you chose to. But this deck generates a lot of value, and it generates a lot of value by playing units. Timely Intervention, huge play. Confiscate can be a huge play. Fell the Dragon, even out of aspect, can be a huge play. Those are the only 3 events that we see in this. And so this is a deck that looks to play units for value. How does it fold? Initiative. Playing from behind can be very tough for this deck because those units come in damaged. He can use those higher stats, and he can create those higher stats, but if my turn 1 play is a Battlefield Marine and he plays out Cassian Andor and I claim initiative, I am going to go ahead and kill that Cassian because I don't have to deal with 5 health. I've got to deal with 3. Units that can ambush and stick are a big advantage, especially if you have initiative, because it means that you can clear something, and then Han has to come back and decide if he is going to play a unit under value that unit can then take out on a subsequent turn, is an important thing. Sentinels, especially if you can get a Sentinel shielded, because, again, Han is coming in with damage on his units. breaking through a Sentinel can force a 2-for-1 trade, especially if we're talking about a Sentinel that has either significant health or has a shield. And then finally, damage-based removal. Damage-based removal or massive amounts of indirect. Smaller health pools, less leverage, less ability to soak damage. You know, if you were putting these units out at their normal value and you were playing against Boba Yellow, which is not a very popular deck type, but you were playing against significant indirect damage, Han would have to think very carefully about, is he going to continue to use his leader ability and have a smaller overall health pool? Is he then fast enough to beat Boba, who has some good units? They're not great units, but they're still good units that he's putting on the table. Or would he have to keep things on their regular value and ignore his leader ability so that these things are not just cleanly defeated in order to keep damage off the base? These are the ways that Han2 folds. How do you beat it? Aggression. Utilize ECL in a place where you can get a clean 2-for-1. If I have the ability early on to clean up a couple of units in the first couple of turns, followed by, he doesn't have 4 attack on the board somewhere, and I'm able to push K2 and do some damage, not take out K2 with the attack, but force you to come back through it again because you don't want to take more overwhelm damage. That's a nice clean 2-for-1. Otherwise, ECL is fighting uphill against that 8 health. Eliminating units where you can win trades is kind of tempting, but it's a race that you will not. But it's not a race that you're going to win. The reason for that is that his 6-4 Poe still lands the turn before yours, still wipes yours out in the trade, and it's going to be 2 more turns before you can do something like Wrecker to get rid of it. And so he's always going to be able to put the bigger unit than you on the table. So you're going to have to find ways to push damage into the base, use things like your events that are able to help push, and force Han to be the one trading units. Stay on your front foot, stay with initiative, keep pushing in a way that you are able to break through. Be aware of having a second unit stick, though. If Han is just pushing back, and pushing base, heavy at 3 resources, and getting coordinate online is just an absolute monster. He's tough at 4 resources, and he's tough at 4 resources when he can swing with raid 2. So this is a very difficult thing to kind of get around. In control, very similar to Rey, you do not have enough 1-to-1 removal to churn through this deck. You do not have it. He has look at the deck. He has 9 events. He's playing 60 cards. He's got 51 units. You don't have enough 1-to-1 removal to get rid of that. Sequencing your damage-based removal where you can multiple for 1 is a huge, huge thing. Putting yourself in a position, if you're Qi'ra, where you can shield one of your Sentinels, sequencing your turn in a way that you're able to get one of your Sentinels down and put a shield on it is big. Against this list, Traitorous is a very poor choice because there's not a whole lot of things in this list that are 3 cost. We have 4 cards that cost 3, and then we run out of things that we can hit with Traitorous. They're all going to be damaged. And so they're all going to be damaged and small in a way that his other units can take them out pretty cleanly. Much better plays on 5 are things like Devastating Gunship, which can often take something out that is left at 2 health, or Overwhelming Barrage if you can sequence it well. Wu talks about this in a couple of his videos about Qi'ra. Sequencing intelligently, making sure there are places where grabbing initiative so that you can Overwhelming Barrage at the start of a turn rather than attacking with Qi'ra, trying to set something up, making it where your opponent can claim initiative. If you don't have the resources to play Overwhelming right now, putting yourself in a position where Qi'ra could be defeated rather than being able to set off that overwhelming barrage is a much worse play than taking initiative a little bit early, setting up OB, and making yourself able to deal with what's on the board. Have specific removal for Crate Dragon. There are times where you're going to have to take 5 damage, 6 damage, whatever it is. Whether you're playing Fell or Rivals Fall or playing a No Glory, there are times where you're going to have to deal with and eat the cost to some of your units or base of playing against Crate Dragon. If you do that with Devastator, you better be in a huge lead because 10 to your base is going to be problematic. The mirror. Win your trades. Try and put yourself in a position where you are able to outvalue your opponent by having a unit that sticks after a trade. The Han leader, and this kind of goes for just the general matchups, that Han leader is safest when he is in the leader zone. In the mirror match, that might mean that, both players flip Han, both players attack Han into Han, and, we wipe each other out, but that meant that we're back to being able to resource cheat because Han came out this turn and was gone this turn, rather than being able to be sequenced out so that he misses a turn. And that can be very important also for both aggression and control, taking out Han in a way that he does not get to use his ability. Chip damage against a true mirror can win games. If you have ways that you can push a little bit of extra damage through and get to spots where, like, hey, we've gone back and forth, I've got this unit left, you're going to need to, you need to attack into me, but I can push a little bit of damage to base here. Chip damage can win games because there's not a restore card in here. The Adelphi Patrol Wing can steal initiative, even if it does not get +2, because you can still attack with that unit. And so this is still a way, even though you don't get the bonus, that you can play an Adelphi Patrol Wing, develop your board in space, attack with a unit, and be more aggressive with how you're playing than if you wait and try and get initiative and then play that card to try and get its full value. Starting with the flip turn, especially in a mirror against Han, try and figure out how to be the first to get your Crate Dragon on the table. So understanding how many attacks are left on the board, how many actions you need to make, how many actions your opponent should be making, so that you can be on the initiative and able to play your Crate Dragon first, is a massive, massive swing in this game. Last one, Qi'ra. We'll talk about the Qi'ra data vault here. If you want a high level of what Qi'ra data vault does, see the videos by Wu. He has been playing this deck since Qi'ra came out, and has multiple layers of videos on this for each of those metas, including this one. How she works: board control, grit, high end value. Blue, green, villainy has the best units in the game. Just does. That's where the biggest and strongest things are. That is where they're the most consistent. And so she's going to try and get there, and is going to try and outlast you to get there. Her early game units are able to chip, but they're also able to keep the board stable, and quite often they're able to do that and remain on the board, especially if they get shielded. She does prefer to turn 2 ramp if possible, because that means that the Qi'ra leader flip can now hold most other leaders in the game hostage. Her leader ability cuts the board in half. It heals everything back up and then cuts everything's HP in half. And then she becomes, she's an 08 here with grit. And so she's a part of this, which means she's a 4/4. But that also means that your 7 health leader just got chopped down to 4 remaining. And so Qi'ra is able to take them out cleanly. It's not unless you had you'd have to have a 9 health leader for her not to be able to take it out on her flip. That blue-green combo is very deep in both 1-for-1 removal and effective damage-based removal. You have access to Villainy Command on the ground, which has some amazing cards in Vader and Maul, and has Reinforcement Walker to back it up. This is probably the most fair matchup into the field of what is currently in the meta. It's very adaptable. It's very difficult to just go out and think that you're going to just be here to beat Qi'ra. This is Wu's list from the PQ that he won. 70-something people in that. So a very good size PQ. A couple of things that I'll point out here. Presence of Sentinels. You have the Pike Sentinel. You have the Phase 3 Dark Trooper. And you have the Perimeter ATRT. You do have Childson in this as well in the sideboard. And if you are playing with Childson, you have enough green in here that you can really make, that you kind of, you want to make his inclusion something that might get rid of other aspects a little bit to make his, to make his thing stick a little bit better. But the cleaner way to say that is your Perimeter ATRT at the same cost has a higher floor. This is always going to be a 3-5. It's not going to be better than a 3-5, but it's also not going to be a 2-2. And so, while I expect that if you're playing Childson, you're probably going to have some blue in your hand, there's not a guarantee that you're not, drawing double green on one of those turns or having to make the resource choice of putting something down that is green, hiccups, in order to make sure that your Childson is big. And I don't want to be forced into resourcing an overwhelming barrage in order to have a bigger Childson. That's just not a good play. The main deck configuration here is not incredibly heavy on one-to-one control. You do have Power of the Dark Side, you do have Fell of the Dragon, you do have No Glory. Then you have some damage-based in Overwhelming Barrage, which is the best card in this deck. You do have a couple of copies of Super Laser Blast to reset the board. And then you've got some other things in here that are meant for winning a control matchup, which is to say the Relentless and the Restock. If you're playing against control, they'll talk about bringing in Palp's Return. Any of these ships are good into various matchups, but take a look at this top end because everything out here is problematic for most decks. And so if Qi'ra gets there, you're going to have a tough time winning. How does it fold? Constant pressure. And I mean constant pressure. You've got to, if you continue to chip damage at Qi'ra, especially in the early game where she is, and she's not able to get her Sentinel set up, and she's not able, and she has to continue trading units, but continue trading units after you have attacked. You have to get under it. The adaptability of this deck makes it where the pilot is probably a little bit more important at times than the deck itself. And if you can put pressure on whoever is running this deck and make it where they are having difficulty figuring out what to do next, that's your better win con. Forcing poor sequencing, which you can do even with a good pilot. Forcing poor sequencing, especially on the Qi'ra flip turn. Having actions to churn, having actions to make so that Kira's flip turn is more awkward for her, and she does not have either a good target to come in and flip and cut in half, or she doesn't have a great way, or she's pulled off of being able to do something like Overwhelming Barrage. The other way that Qi'ra folds is to deny her board cleanup. So whether that is denying OB in some way, whether you are able to pull it out of their hand with Bazine or Spark or something similar, or if you are able to put Regional Governor down and keep OB from happening until you're ready for it, and you're able to clean some board back up. It's not their central win con, but it is very important to this deck it's very important for this deck's stability. 6 is a hard turn for this deck. that 6 resource turn is a very difficult turn for Qi'ra to contend with, because the only thing that she has naturally in this list that plays at 6 for its correct value is Vigilance. And that's not necessarily the thing she wants to play. The next board reset past OB is Super Laser Blast, and that's all the way at 8. And so, yeah, you've got some good things that you can be playing, and that's not to say that she's got some great plays that can come in and really put the screws to you when you're talking about Overwhelm, Barrage, and other things like that on the 6 resource turn. At 7, she's got some great plays. At 8, she's got some great plays, including Super Laser Blast. At 9, she's got strength. At 10, she's got strength. But if you can make 5 and 6 very awkward, then that's the way that Qi'ra can kind of fold. Aggression. You are not going to beat this deck at its top end. You're going to have to do it before it stabilizes. You're going to have to recognize the places where trading is needed versus attacking base. Sequencing correctly is critical, because there are places where if Qi'ra puts a shield on her Hylabon Enforcer, now that Hylabon Enforcer can take out a 3, sometimes a 4, depending on what she's done with maybe Dr. Pershing, and can do that in a way where she cleanly wins the trade because she leaves behind a 3-power unit or a 4-power unit that you then have to deal with still. And so making those trades more awkward for her and sequencing in a way where if you have to clear a unit, you do it while it's small is important. Forcing an awkward flip turn, doing things like playing your units in a way and taking your actions in a way that she has to spend resources and can't Overwhelming Barrage. Having yourself in a spot where you don't leave a 3 attack on the board by itself, especially if you have actions remaining, or making sure that, if Qi'ra flips and she attacks into a 3 and you don't have another action that can take her out immediately, that you may want to go ahead and claim, even if your next action is going to require some work, because you want to be able to clear that 7-1 Qi'ra rather than them grab initiative early and Overwhelming Barrage off of it. Holding K2SO ready for Kira's flip is great. It's a mutual kill, and you get 3 damage to base. Sabine may consider even something like a ping, even on ECL, where it is greatly to your mathematical disadvantage if it forces Qi'ra to act first, because a 4-2 K2SO still clears Qi'ra and means that she didn't get the opportunity to perhaps clear Sabine. So that's a strong play for you. In the configuration that you saw, this is a poor matchup for control. A smart Qi'ra player is very happy playing a resource and passing and saying that, if you want to 1-for-1 control me, the first thing that I'm going to play is Vader. Because then Vader's going to put down 2 units, and you're either going to have to spend 2 cards and get things done, or I'm going to have a unit that got left behind, and I'm going to claim, and I'm going to swing, and going to start putting damage into base. Save that targeted removal for the top end. Sequence in a way that allows you to remove threats without soaking a bunch of damage. If possible, having a way in your deck that snipes restock and vigilance, because a 60-card deck is going to be next to impossible to mill out, and if they are able to restock a vigilance, you are done. The other thing that you're going to have to be able to do is you're going to have to be able to play around Relentless, and so that can be greatly problematic. In a mirror, this is a grind match. You might win this match on a good hit from Vigilance against equally skilled players, but the same principles still apply. Sequencing your turns well, forcing her into turns where she does not get well sequenced and maybe be able to take out things through Overwhelming Barrage is important. If you're running Annihilator as a part of what you bring in, especially in a sideboard, be aware that no glory will allow your opponents to dictate that when defeated effect. And so just be aware of that in the mirror, that if you You clear Relentless, you do something like that, and then they know glory that they're going to be able to clear something off of your board and out of your deck. Anyway, that's what we have for today. I have to go let the dogs out. Until next time, take care.